Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and Ariagak. Thank you for attending the first presentation here at the Woodward Library. As you see, it's a beautiful facility. Before we begin, I would like to first tell you about Dr. Kitabjan, and then I'm going to have Ms. Williams just talk to you a little bit about the Armenian cultural visionaries for a very short while, and then Dr. Kitabjan will start the lecture, this interesting lecture on the Armenians of the Titanic. So Dr. Kitabjan has been a physician in Pasadena for 35 years as an internist. He served in the military, he was a colonel, and he was ready to... Major, sorry, Major. All right, so Major Colonel Lunbandan. Anyway, you just got promoted, it's fine. Anyway, and we are very pleased that he's here, and he came all the way from Los Angeles to make this wonderful presentation to our community, and I'm sure you will enjoy the talk because I find it to be very interesting, just the Titanic itself, without even talking about the Armenians. So now, I would like to present Ms. Sharon Williams from our Armenian Cultural Visionaries Group.
Well, I'm not going to take up a lot of your time, but one of the questions that was given to us about this event was, who are those Armenian cultural visionaries? I've heard about them, but I don't know, it seems like a little secret group. And so we said, gosh, we're really not a secret group. We really have a lot of fun together, and I wanted to tell you who we are. We are a 501c3. We are a group, and our mission is to enhance the knowledge of the culture, the richness of the culture, especially bringing it forth here in the Central Valley. And people know who Armenians are, but do they know the depth of who we are? Do they know our beautiful manuscript pages? Do they know, have they heard, yes, that we were the first to nationally adopt Christianity, but what's the richness of that really? And what's the meaning behind it? And so there have been several of us who met together for just fun for a while. And then it seemed like we needed a mission. We needed to have something to do together. And somehow or another, it evolved around to let's form a group so that what we can do is all this talk that we're doing, that we can do it in a broader sense. And let everybody in on this talk and this conversation that we're having. And I wanted to introduce to you who's part of this group, and John and Barbara Chukazian, and Bob and Mary Ellen Hewson, and Gadian Ketenjin, Abraham Tarian, and although Sarah doesn't want her name with us, she just can't help it. She's part of us. Dr. and Dr. Tarians, and Guy Decatrell. Some of you may know him. Dan Griffith from Fresno State College. Maggie Goshen, of course, from Ararat. Armina Shishmanyan. And did I get everybody, Armina? Edo Margosian. And his wife, Dr. Margosian. I think there's probably 10 of us, or 11 of us. But we want you in on our conversation. And part of our conversation is saying, wow, we want everybody to hear this story that that the doctor has to tell us today. And so welcome, and look for us, and we're going to probably be doing this often, and we're going to be doing lots of different things, not just lectures. And I would especially like to recognize Dead Hide Bostanian tonight. Thank you for being here, Dead Hide, and Yet It's Skin. It's a privilege to have you here. And all of you, it's a privilege to have you here. Just enjoy yourselves.
Thank you very much for inviting me here, and I want to thank of course, the Armenian visionaries, of course, the library, beautiful structure, and want to thank Maggie Boshin's name, which was mentioned, who is the director of the Armenian Museum. And also, I'm on the board of NASER, National Association of Armenian Studies and Research. And so they are all basically voluntary organizations, although most of them depend on donations. I just want to bring that up. Okay, so today's subject is Armenians on the Titanic. And before this came to my attention, I had no idea that Armenians were there, although if you try to look deep enough into any area or subject, there's always some Armenian someplace that has been there. What I'm going to talk about is what the accepted information is, although recently some additional information came to my attention that there might even be an additional person who had been saved on the Titanic. And I'll just briefly talk about that. Oh, I'm chasing away a fly, so don't. It's a Fresno fly. They're nasty. Okay, before I start, I just want to loosen up everybody and tell you a Istanbul Sea joke. My wife is from Istanbul. Well, she didn't tell me this one. You may have heard it. So all these prime ministers died. That includes Putin from Russia, Erdogan of Turkey, and unfortunately Obama, although he was the youngest one in the group. They go all to hell. And the devil comes and says, you get to do one phone call. Okay, although keep it brief. And I'm going to charge you if it's, too lengthy. So Putin talks for a whole hour, tells them how to really control all those people in Russia and all the Chechens and the Kafkas people and so on. So he finishes, and the devil says, that's going to be 10,000 rubles. He says, wow, but it's okay, we have money, we have lots of oil. So he pays that. And then Obama talks, he gives his lecture acting like Lincoln or FDR, although still mentions Medvedev instead of the genocide. They still would not admit it, even after death. What can you do? The devil says it's going to be $1 million. He says, wow, that's really high, but, we can print more dollars. So it goes over. Erdogan gets on and talks for 2 hours and calls all these demonstrators terrorists and those who have been instigated by Armenians, actually. And when he hangs up, he says, what do I owe you? He says, it's no charge. The devil. He says, what? Well, he says, it was a local call. Hell to hell. Okay, so the subject came to my attention about 3 years ago when I'm looking over some headlines, I look at Groom all the time, which comes out of USC, Armenian headlines, saying that great-granddaughter of a Titanic survivor is going to get married at Milwaukee Museum. And what? You know, and her name was Melissa Vartanian. So I downloaded that and looked at it, and what was happening was that the Milwaukee Public Museum was going to have an exhibit on relics from the Titanic. To advertise it, they put out an announcement saying that whoever has the closest story to a Titanic person involved in the Titanic, write us an essay, and we were willing to pay the wedding expenses, including the gown, the meal, and all the expenses. And the wedding is going to take place in the museum. And the winner was, of course, Melissa Vartanian, was going to get married to Vacha Mikhailian in Milwaukee. And the story was that her great-grandfather, David Vartanian, had survived the Titanic. When I read this, I said, wow, I didn't know there was an Armenian, but were there any others? Where was he coming from? What was he running away from? And how did he survive? And of course, where was he going? And all these questions come up, and they need to be answered. So, you know, it takes a lot of research, although these days, some of the research is easier. You can sit in your bedroom in pajamas and do the research on the internet. Somebody I know. And sometimes, of course, you have to go to the archives and so on. Trying to find out more, actually there is a lot of information. As John Tukazin said, it's a fascinating subject. It has fascinated people. And by the time I was working on it, it was going to be the 100th anniversary. Now it's the 101st anniversary of the Titanic. I know a lot of people the last year saw a lot of programs on the television. Some of them are actually sick and tired of hearing about the Titanic. So actually, I'm not going to talk about the Titanic that much. I'm going to talk about the Armenians who are on the Titanic. Okay, before I go further, you notice how beautiful the printing is on this PowerPoint. Guess how I learned about it? My 9-year-old grandson, Noah Math, was sitting there. 2 weeks ago, I'd come to our house, and he was doing some nice slides, PowerPoint on some kind of fish. What was it? Yeah, mahi-mahi. And he showed me, because I'd made this before, but it was very straightforward font, like the printing on my name. But he says, look what you can do. And all the way that these things come on. I didn't know that these were present. So like it says in the Bible also, we're going to be taught by the kids. And they have the information now. And they are so quick, and they are so far ahead. I'm just thinking about my childhood in Aleppo. I was born in Aleppo. And, you know, I only was playing around with hammer and nails and piece of wood. And these kids are playing with computers and fonts and so on. The progress. Okay, so this is the couple who's going to get, well, was going to get married. Of course, they have married now. Melissa and Vacha Mikhailian. And that's how we got on the subject matter. Eventually, I found the email on Melissa. She works for a theater group in Milwaukee, and communicated with her. So I got some pictures, both of her grandfather and also their wedding pictures, and some more detail about the family history. So that was the original research that I had. There have been a few articles written about the Armenians. Actually, one of the first ones was by a lady called Tepton, I believe, who came across one of the cemeteries in Halifax, Nova Scotia, where one of the Titanic persons who did not survive is buried there. So she comes down to that realized that there was an Armenian on the Titanic, and then she wrote an article about that. And of course, there's the Titanic. I read about it. The only thing I want to tell you that most people didn't say, the fork smokestack is a false smokestack. No smoke comes out of it. They put it there because it looks better forward and there you are. Okay. That's maybe one thing that we didn't know. Now, this is the trip that they took. I don't have a pointer, so I'm going to use the ladies. I told them if there was a Turk who came here to complain, maybe I can defend myself. So the Titanic started at Southampton, England. Actually made a stop at Cherbourg, France. And all our passengers actually had come to Marseille, which is southern France, and then they went by railroad to Cherbourg to get on the Titanic. Okay. Then also made a stop in Ireland, Queenstown, then went the third day's travel, each one is 1 day, the Arrows, and that's where the iceberg hit the ship. Okay. Otherwise they were going to go all the way to New York. They weren't that far, but this is Nova Scotia and Halifax is here, and that's where they took the bodies to be buried. Although some of the bodies were buried at sea because they ran out of embalming fluid, and also they mostly kept the bodies embalmed of the rich people. Here is the dichotomy between the rich and poor. The reason was that for the rich to have their will, shall I say, put into force, they had to have a death certificate. Now the poor, it didn't matter to them, although they are also individuals. So there it is. That's one of the reasons that we think about Titanic, because there was this divide between the rich and the poor people could not get up to the main deck on top where the lifeboats were. So that was one reason they couldn't get on their lifeboats, because they were not allowed to get to the top deck unless they broke the gates and the chains. So here there's percentage of women and children saved. Can you hear me like this?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm shouting, I know. 94% from first cabin, second cabin, but the steerage, the people at the bottom, this is all still women and children. Look at the men saved, very few of the men in steerage. Some of the crew got saved because they had to use the crew for manning the boats with the rowboats. So that's why. The number of crew that are females are very small, so this is not a reliable number. So you can see the difference that still a lot of the men got saved in the first cabin because they were right there, so they got on the lifeboats. Okay. I won't mention the Jewish couple though. Okay. All right. Since we're talking about Armenians. Here are the 6 who we think, at least we have the records of who got on, and here's the ticket numbers and their ages. You can see they are all 20 years old. The ones that are a little bit more highlighted, Nishant Rikoyan, the number 1, and number 4, David Vartanian. He is our star. We're going to talk about him some more. Are the ones who survived. Manfred Zakarian was the one, this one, whose body was gotten back out, and that's the one who's buried in Halifax, Nova Scotia. The other people, their bodies were never recovered. We do have some detailed information about every one of them, and they were all actually coming from Kari or Keri villages. And this area, I'm going to talk about some more, is a mountainous area close to Erzurum. And it is surrounded by 3 mountains: Dersim, and Bingöl, and Shaitan. Shaitan means the devil, which is to do with my joke, of course. And there is a legend about the Dersim mountain, how it's named. There were a number of Kurds who lived there who came to the men in Kelly, and they wanted them to build some homes for them because the Armenians were good in construction. So as they were digging for the foundation, they come up with a headstone. On it says, Der Simon Vartabet. Okay. So the Armenians are amazed because they knew about Der Simon Vartabet, who was an amazing priest about 10th century during the Arabian invasion. And they plead with the Kurds, saying, can we have this stone? We're going to take it, put it in our church in the village. The Kurds said, no, you cannot have it, because sometime back, we were also Armenian, and their Simon was a very good priest for us. And we had hidden from the Arabs in the mountains. Later on, they had turned to become Kurds because they did not want to be discriminated, while they were living there. Of course, these are the same people who salvaged and helped a number of Armenians during the genocide in 1915. Again, hiding them in the mountains. They're very treacherous areas, and the Turkish military did not pursue them. And which is now it's called Tunceli. The Turks have changed all the names, of course. Claim that they have Armenian blood, and they want to change their ID cards so that they'll say that their religion is Christian instead of Muslim. This is the area that was bombed during 1938, which Erdogan admitted that they did. This one, he will not admit the genocide, of course. And the main aviatrix who bombed it was this lady who was adopted by Atatürk, who was an Armenian. And when Hrant Dink exposed this reality, the Turks just would not accept it. And that's one of the main reasons, actually, why Hrant Dink was assassinated. Okay. Let's see what's next. Now, this is our first person. I can't think of his name now. I got carried away. But it's not our David Vartanian. That's right, yes. And the next one, this is our star, David Vartanian. So, how did he survive? Well, there was a report that he jumped into the water next to one of the lifeboats and held onto the edge, although they kept hitting his hands with the oars because they didn't want him to come into the boat. Although the lifeboats were none of them were filled to capacity. But they did not want to take anyone else because they were afraid they're going to get overloaded and sink. But he kept trying, and eventually they pulled him in. But he was in the icy waters because, imagine there are icebergs in the water. It's salty water, so it's got to be below freezing. We think that at that time in North Atlantic, the temperature is probably like 28 degrees Fahrenheit. And a person can't last in it more than a few minutes. Due to hypothermia, the muscles start shivering and cannot breathe, so they really go out that way. They don't even drown, they just pass out. They interviewed his grandson, And he said that below the waist and his legs of David Vartanian were purple the remainder of his life. He thinks that it was because of being in the frozen water, although he did not lose any fingers or toes. Then he was saved that way. He was taken to New York. Then he and the Korean went to, they were heading towards Canada. Hamilton and Brampton, Ontario, where they had heavy steel factories, and they think that that they found out about this. All of them were actually planning to go to Canada, but they were planning to go there to make money, then send it to their wife. They all had families. Actually, David was just married, had no children, but decided that wanted to go get out of Cali area and go to the United States or Canada, and they knew that there was enough work there in the steel plants, so came there. They were going to send money to the family. Then their plan was, after they made enough money, to go back to Turkey. Of course, after 1915, their whole plans changed, and they decided that they would try to bring the families over. Of course, this is what we're talking about. You can see the oars and some people hanging on the oars trying to be saved while the ship is going down. This is a dramatized picture from one of the books. And this is the old bridge. This was called the Honeymoon Bridge over Niagara Falls. This one got washed out in the 1920s, and they built a new one. Now it's called Rainbow Falls. Okay, somebody shaking their head. You've been there. Well, what happened to David Vartanian's wife? This is the question, because she was at Cali. Of course, the genocide was horrible for the villagers in Erzurum in those areas. Most of them didn't get even deported to Derzor. They were killed in the nearby valleys because it was a very mountainous area. We find out that actually she went part of the way to Kharkiv, then ended up in an orphanage, and stayed there, then decided to go back to her village, which was called Zermak. David was from a village called Oror, which means lullaby. Ororjan, you know, a song like that. Well, they lost contact of each other after the genocide because he didn't know where she was. She was afraid that he had died during the Titanic thing, so it took them about 5 years. He wrote letters to every bishop or center, the churches, orphanages, until he found her. So he sent her money and started, it took him 5 years to find her, started to get her papers ready so she could come to Canada. Well, of course, I was going to say at the beginning that if there is a persistent love story, this is one of them. You could make a movie of this, that the guy didn't give up. You know, he could have said, well, maybe she died, I'll marry someone else here, you know, instead of going back. Meanwhile, after World War II, Canada, as well as the United States, tightened their immigration rules. Basically, they were having a lot of Chinese coming in. Of course, they became very protective at that time against immigrants, which sounds similar to present days, actually. So they said nobody from Asia to be taken in as an immigrant. And of course, where David Vartanian's wife was in Asia. So did Canada. Well, he worked on it. Eventually, he got the papers for her to come 6 years later. Meanwhile, where he worked, the steel plant's closed, and he moved to a place called Leadville, Pennsylvania. Sounds toxic.
Yes.
Okay. And so her papers were to come to Canada. So he gets a friend of his who is still living there to get her, when she arrives there, and takes her to the Canadian side of the bridge. She says, now you start walking, your husband is waiting for you at the other end. Trust me. So she walks, and on her back was this cover made out of silk, cover for her bed from Roshi, from her marriage thing. That's the only thing she brought from the whole country. Wrapped around, and she tied it on her back. So she comes over, and they meet at the U.S. end, and fortunately, the security was not that tight in those days, so she could get through. So they sort of redo their marriage lives, and they have children, and this is how the family gets along. But a few years ago, all the grandkids, I think, wanted a part of this cover that she brought. It's the only memory they have. So they cut it into 16 pieces and bolster it again, sort of, and give each one a part of this cover so they can own part of their history. Okay, now this is where Kelly is. See if my stick, it's up there. It's right here. Kelly, Kasava. There's some mountains you can see. Down here would be the other Devil Mountain and Bingo Mountain. And I want you to pay attention to Bitlis, where it is. This is the Lake Vaughan. Bitlis, Erzurum, and Treviso. Okay, keep that in mind because that's going to come in handy later. And this is a greater detail of that area. Here's Erzurum, which is named Karin by Armenians. Kelly or Kelly is here. Oops. Here is Sur Louis Mountain, which is the main peak in that mountain range. Here are some of the towns, Darman and Barke, and so on. So this is where it is. Here's Bengal Mountains, and there's it would be over here. Okay. So how would one travel to go to France from here? So what they did is they go to Erzurum, which is the main town. Then this is the highway. No, I think it's this way. Sorry, I get confused. Up here like this to go to Treviso, which is the Black Sea, and take a ship to go to either Constantinople or to Marseille. Okay. Now here is the names of at least, I think I counted 40 villages of Kevi. Okay. And I'm looking for Jermut, where Mary Bartania was from. And here is Auror, where David Bartania is from. But there are a number of names that you can see where people have come from. But you notice these are the names of the churches. Every village had a church. And this is actually, it says for those who cannot read Armenian, the Turkish genocide is in Erzurum region, and how much we have lost. Just in this area only, you have lost 40 churches. So that's why when the Patriarchate in Istanbul says we have 1,700 churches that belong to us and the property that the Turks have taken over, they're not, I mean, you know, just in this little region, you've got 40 churches. Just imagine throughout, you know, Western Armenia, historic Armenia, how much, you know, we have lost. Now, these are other regions. And Vans also, I did not go into that, which are monasteries. They're on the right. Okay. Now, the reasons why they left. If life was easy, you know, they weren't going to leave. So what was it? Lack of security. If somebody came, robbed you, you called the police. Well, the police either doesn't come or he says, Yalla, it's okay, you know, just go on. Because they do not persecute criminals if they are Turks or Kurds. And you get robbed on the way, or your son gets killed, there is no redress. Lack of improvements. There was lots of water, rivers flowing everywhere from the mountains, but no irrigation projects, nothing. The bridges would fall apart and nobody repaired it. Multiple taxes, that really got me the thing most excited. There are so many taxes that these poor people had to pay, you don't know how they survived. First of all, it was very hard to raise any crops. And after raising crops like wheat or curry or whatever, you had to leave the grain on the ground where you separate from the wheat from the chaff until the tax collector came. And he would weigh it or measure it, and he would take 1/10 as your tax of growing wheat. Well, they would wait. They would first go to the Turk or Kurds fields, and they would wait until it rained. Then your wheat gets moldy, and it's useless. And you cannot use it as seed for the next year. Armenians were allowed to join the military after the 1908 constitutional change. But if you paid additional bedel, it's called, a tax, you could be exempted from being inducted into the military. However, because Erzurum was right on the border with Russia, and Turks were constantly warring, well, thank you very much. Warring with the Russians, they kept a military presence there all the time. But in the winter, there wasn't much activity going. But they did not have any special military bivouacs or fortresses. So the military personnel had the right to come to your home and commandeer your residence as the place for them to stay the winter. And you had to feed them and keep them warm. And you didn't know what to do with your women folk because they got raped. So you had to take them to your relatives and so on. But I'm talking about long winters there up in the mountainous area. You know, so it was a terrible, terrible existence. The actual government would not pay the military. They would be behind. So the military did not have money to even spend, even if they were going to pay for their meals. And that's what got them to do where, you know, they would just come and take whatever they needed. If you had animals, you had to pay additional tax on the animal, on the head of each animal, and so on. And then as time went on, because the government did not pursue the criminals, the relation between the local Turks and the Kurds got deteriorated. And this happened a lot of the time because some of the Turks were displaced from the Greek and Romanian parts of their Ottoman Empire because they lost those areas. So they brought all these displaced Turks and settled them where there was a larger Armenian presence in towns and villages. they never wanted a majority in any town or village in Turkey of Armenians. They wanted them to be a minority, even locally. So it was, and these people, because they had seen hardship by Christians, of course, in other areas of Eastern Europe, so they were anti-Christian, of course, and the Armenians were considered in the same region. So that was a real problem. Okay, now who's this person? Yeah, we're back to Fresno again, huh? Yeah. Well, the reason I put his picture, and I have one more, is that when I told you about Bitlis, his family came from Bitlis. His father had come earlier to the United States, but his mother and his mother's family were coming after the father sent them some money, but was not enough. What happened was that just like his family, every one of these people had to go to every town, like they went to Trebizond at the Black Sea, but they had no additional money. So they had to stop there and work to get additional money so they can take the ship to go to France. Then in Marseille, again, they stopped and so on. So Saran has written a few in his later writings. If you don't mind my reading this, I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs for you. My mother's father has died in Bitlis, and dying had said to my mother's mother, "Get the family out of here. Leave this place, go anywhere else, but do not stay here any longer. Go to America if you can manage." And of course she did. But on the way, the people who controlled the papers and the rubber stamps had to be bribed with gold one by one. And then transportation had to be paid for it. First by donkey train over high mountains along the narrow roads from Erzurum to Trabzon, where the ship carried them to Constantinople, and then to Marseille, where they all had to work to raise money for the train ride across France, where again they had to work until there was enough money to put everybody in the ship that sailed to New York, a long crossing far below the ship and steerage. Now, in the Titanic, actually the people in steerage, although they were cooped up down below, at least they didn't have to cook their meals and so on, like probably his family did. This journey from Bitlis to New York took almost 2 years, for it was necessary for my grandmother Lucy, who was in charge of the journey, to halt several times while she and daughters Takui and Verkin and her son Aram worked to earn money for further passage. They spent 3 or 4 months in Erzurum, a month or 2 in Marseille, and almost 6 months in Le Havre. That's where they took their ship. My uncle Aram, then 11 or so, learned French. Just imagine, this says to be the Armenian ability to grasp languages, because they did, and acted as an interpreter for many Armenians on their way to America. The women knitted the stockings, which Aram sold to small shopkeepers. So that's how they really managed to get away. All right. Now, I found a better picture of Saroyan here, as he was older. Out of some magazine in Fresno, in the motel. Okay. Here is the famous couple. They got married, and they had a great wedding. They had 100 guests, and everything was paid for. And the meal that they were served was the last meal served on the Titanic, which was some soup. I think it was beef broth, something, oysters, and I think it was Chateaubriand steak, and some kind of pudding, which they served. Okay. And they also gave, as you enter the museum, someone's Titanic passenger's ticket, which I gave you the numbers, to see if that person survived or did not make it. But all the guests, all the 100 guests on the wedding, they got David Vartanian's ticket. So he survived, So it was a positive story. So when they talked to Melissa, they said, aren't you concerned because there was death and so on in the story? She said, no, this is an attempt to a new life, and had to do with the love of the great-grandparents that they didn't give up, and it's our resilience. So I think that's what we have to get across to our young folks, to say that we haven't failed. We have succeeded, and we got to go on, but persist. Okay, not lose this connection or the string. And that's why my wife and I were trying to write our parents and grandparents' stories in our lives. We don't want to stop the story here. If we didn't write it, it would end here, because we have the connection with our parents and grandparents. But if we didn't write this down, it wouldn't go forward. Then they have to start from the beginning, and the detail gets lost. And this is what we're trying to pass on. That's why I recommend to every one of you, I'm sure you all have stories, if not this is spectacular, but at least somewhat. But everyone's story is singular. Write it down. If you can't write, tape it or dictate it, whatever. Don't let it get lost. Okay. Now, the surprise is here. This guy's name is Valinak Purat. He wrote his memoir in Yanki Usheritz, which means my life's memories, which means my memoir. And this book was published in 1999 in Yerevan, in Armenian. Actually, this came to my attention when I first gave a lecture at our institution. This short Armenian guy came who couldn't speak English. He says, he says, I'm Erzurumsi. And there's one more guy you didn't mention who survived in the Titanic. I said, it can't be, I've gone through it. Well, he says his name is different, Valinak Purat. His father was a famous writer, Zeytunsi, and he was a novelist and a historian. He's written some amazing stories of Zeytun's past. And of course, the Turks got hold of him in 1915, and he was arrested and killed with other intellectuals. He has a very interesting life story. He's been in many places and so on, but he gives a very believable story of being on the Titanic in great detail in the book, which I translated for myself, and how he survived. Except I cannot find any evidence, hard evidence, that he was on the Titanic. Now, this is still an ongoing research. I think I mentioned that. I looked at his name, different spellings, Purat, P-Y-U, I-U, and so on. But then in the story says that some other people, Sarafians in England, bought his tickets. Well, maybe it's under Sarafian's name, so I looked under that. Of course, we would have picked it up earlier. It's not there. Then he mentions that he had a French roommate. He was in the steerage on the 3rd level. And the French roommate named Morin. So they get to be friends. They eventually jump together in the water to swim to get on one of the lifeboats. And that guy's name is not on the list either, as a survivor or somebody on the passenger list. Then he says that he was hospitalized after getting rescued by the rescue ship. His name is not on that list either. And then he was hospitalized. Now we're trying to look into the hospital, which was St. Vincent's Hospital, Manhattan branch, which closed, unfortunately, 3 years ago, trying to get its record. The most fascinating part of the story, he swims and then there's a big wave because the ship went down, and then he was under the wave. He comes up and he bumps against one of the lifeboats. So he tries to hang on, and again, similarly, they hit off to his arm, to his hands. He says, please, please, for God's sake, or something like that. He didn't know good English. And then he passes out. So he doesn't know what happened until he wakes up on the rescue ship, Carpathia. And he doesn't know what happened, except he realized they're hanging some other survivors. Dressed in black. She says, oh, my son, my son. She says, who are you? Right away, the Frenchman comes, Morel, and he translates to him. He says, this is Mrs. Esther. He says, she was the one. So she tells the story. It was the same lifeboat that Mrs. Esther was in. Her husband remained on the ship, and he went down with the ship. You know, rich people. And so when she sees him, she says, oh, this is my son. I lost my husband. You have to save him. He's my son. So they pull him in, although he was passed out. And she helps him. So that's how he survives. So he says, oh, here's your thing. And he had tied his money bag around his neck. She said, I have to take it off because you weren't breathing, so it blocked your breathing and so on. Here's your money, he says. So, and she says, oh, by the way, here's my address. Come and meet me on 5th Avenue, number 18. Okay. This is where the story ends about the Titanic, about this guy. Now, I also found this book about Esther, so I looked into whether this lady mentions about, this saving this one of these people. There's no mention about that by Miss Esther. Now, he also says that his friend, Moran, swam to the rescue ship. And, that's impossible because the rescue ship did not arrive until that morning at daybreak. Well, there was like 6 hours between the sinking of the ship and the rescue ship showing up. The guy would have frozen to death if he didn't pass out. So that is the only discrepancy. And then he also mentions that, the Senate had a hearing on this right away. Actually, it's very interesting. There's a book written just on that part of it, where there was a senator, I can't remember from where, he realized that this was a British ship, but they were American on it. They were responsible for this. So he wanted them, before any of the survivors of the crew or the owners of the ship, who some of them got saved, before they went back to England, he wanted them to come to a Senate hearing. So what he does is he gets them all arrested, okay, put to jail, to call them over one by one to the hearing, which they held in, I believe, Astoria Hotel, actually, for them to give their position. And they also introduced some other survivors. So this guy also says he went to give a testimony, and he's feeling well because it was very close to the ship's engines. He thinks that one of the engines exploded, actually, because it was a big bang, and it was not due to the iceberg. Okay. He said they wouldn't believe us because they listened to the Britishers blaming it on the iceberg. So there's all this thing going on. I looked through this book that has all these testimonies. His name is not in it. So is he an imposter? Or is he a real survivor? He even claims that he got paid $200. They pay survivors $200, but for the family of the ones who were lost, they pay $1,000. You know, so he thought that was unfair because the survivors lost everything. He lost all his. I'll get you. He was bringing his father's books to be sold. He was going to go to Boston to a library, try to sell his father's books. He said they were all lost. Okay. There was one more in his book. There he is. He was in 1926. That's how he looked. And that's the front page of New York Times. He puts it there. But his name isn't anywhere to be found. Okay. I think that on that note, I'm going to stop. Can take questions. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, go ahead.
What years did the granddaughter get married? The pictures.
2009.
I'm sorry.
2009.
2009?
4 years. Yes, go ahead.
Did you ever contact David Bartagna's daughter, Rose Bartagna?
No, but there was some reports of her, but I did not contact. I contacted the great-granddaughter. That's the only contact I...
She married my first cousin, whose name was also Bartagna,
No kidding.
in Georgia.
Yeah. Is she still alive?
In Detroit.
Is
And I
she,
met him.
yeah, is she still alive?
Rose, yes, but
No kidding.
my cousin George passed away
Oh,
2 years ago.
all right.
But he and Rose, David's daughter, Rose,
Yeah,
got married in 1946
I
in
see.
Detroit.
I see, yeah. Yeah, he went to Detroit near the end, and that's
I
where
met him.
Yeah,
He told me that when he arrived in New York,
yeah.
the shipping company gave him $50.
Oh, it was only $50.
And he said they had to take care of so many orphans
Yeah,
that they only could give him $50. He lost everything.
Yeah.
He landed in New York with $50. His legs,
yeah.
he suffered terribly from frostbite.
All right.
And he could never get much feeling in his legs. He was all, I think that he survived two, he escaped twice from death.
I
The
see.
second time
Yeah.
was when he had cancer of the larynx.
Oh.
And his daughter Rose
Yeah.
took him to Canada to St. Agnes, no, St. Catherine.
That was in Qatar, right?
Cobalt therapy. And he survived it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Very good. Yeah. They said that he had a limp and he used the baston, to walk with. And they called him Titanic David in the town that he retired in. Yeah, just prison.
What made you to do all this, to go, chase this story and go deeper? What was the reason you did that?
It's like the guy who climbed Everest, because it's there. It's also an Armenian story of survival.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I never thought that there would be Armenians on Titanic. And then, what was the reason more people were not saved? They didn't have enough lifeboats?
Yeah, well, I didn't go into that because everybody heard about that. But they only had 16 lifeboats. And each one, I believe, would take only 20 or 24 people, something like that. So, you know, how many people can you save it was worse than that because I said they didn't fill him up. They had not practiced lowering the lifeboat. So when they painted it, the ropes that held the pulleys, they were hardened with the paint. They wouldn't let loose. So they had to cut the ropes and drop the cable, the lifeboat down, and one of them turned over and they lost it. It sank, and it was a pandemonium in that sense. Actually, I don't know, you've been on cruises, I'm sure, most of you. We usually joke when, as soon as you get on board, they say you got to go to your mustering station. This was originated from the Senate hearings, not only to have enough lifeboats for everybody, in addition to practice this, and actually the people, the ship's sailors, supposed to practice lowering this thing down and pulling it back up so they know how to do it. It's not just for show. You don't know when you're going to need it, But my sister went on a cruise from Florida with a Disney ship 10 years ago or something, and the ship caught fire, just like that other thing in recently. And they had to get into the lifeboats, but they were okay. But some of the lifeboats now, I don't know if you've seen, it's almost impossible to get into it, and you have to wait in line down below. It takes hours to get into it. If the ship is really sinking, there's no time for it. Yeah, but there was a lot of regulations put in after the Titanic for that reason. But at that time, the regulation was even less. And then they didn't want extra weight on the ship, for with the lifeboats. Of course, now the construction is different. The lifeboats are lighter. Yeah. Any other questions, or shall we? Okay. Thank you again for coming. This is yours, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kitabcan.
I'm honored.
This was a wonderful presentation. Thank you on behalf of the... And Dr. Kitabcan does not live in Fresno. He came all the way from Los Angeles with his wife to do this presentation for us. So, again, thank you very much. Visionaries, please don't leave. At the end, we'd like to basically take a picture with Dr. Kitabcan for our archives, so if that's okay. We have someone here that's quite important. I'd like you to come forward, please, please. This gentleman has put together, just like Dr. Kitabcan has put together, a wonderful display about the Armenians that joined the French Legion and went back and fought against the Turks. Would you mind just taking 1 second, just a brief... I know it's not this subject, but we're going to provide you with one commentary on that. I'd really appreciate it.
Several years ago, the ALMA, the Armenian Museum of the United States, prepared a presentation, which is on permanent in Massachusetts, and it was a traveling display, which was here at Fresno, displayed at CSU Fresno, 2009. Some of you may have attended that, and I assisted Barlow Dragadichian with the preparation and the ongoing display, as well as the special presentation at that time. Member of the Armenian Legion, which fought in the Syrian-Palestine front during World War I, and I have a particular interest in that. I am a part-time professor at Fresno State University, ITT Technical Institute here in Fresno. Ken Michoyan. My apologies for coming late this evening. I had obligations at the college this evening. My great-uncle had a ticket for the Titanic, and part of the group that was to embark at Cherbourg, France, on that evening of the Titanic sailing. And so he missed the ship by a blessing, missed the ship. His taxi from Paris came out late. The lighter boat that was going out to the anchorage. So thank you very much. Thank you.
You know, we have so much. Just really start digging them up. You'd be surprised the wealth. We have, and the history that we have, which most of, gosh, it's like an ocean. It's never ending, because we keep encountering people who relate to the Armenians on all levels, whether it be religious or you name it. So we have refreshments on the side. And thank you for coming and attending. And like Sharon said, we're doing a lot more presentations like this. Yes?
Linda, you're older, but I just wanted to say that the young people in the audience are
we did that because we told them if they did. The children that you see over here are Dr. Kitabjan. Okay. Will the grandkids stand up for a minute? Come on.
Oh, they're not?
I don't know.
Oh, my goodness.
And will the other children